Hello, I'm Jayanti Dasgupta. I work at Educational Initiatives. We have with us Sridhar Rajgopalan, the co-founder and Chief Learning Officer of Educational Initiatives. Today I would request Sridhar sir to share with us the best practices on how to build teacher competency in using data to reform teaching learning process. My first question to you is, sir, how do we use students' assessment data for improving the learning process?
Yes, that's a very important question because especially in these times of COVID, children are going through learning processes. They're learning in different ways, but we don't really know for sure how much they are actually understanding. And assessments is the answer, of course. And basically, the idea in assessments is that if the assessments are designed well, then we ensure that through every question there is data available to the teachers on how the children are performing. There are certain insights like the common errors that children make, and if teachers are able to look at and analyze this data, where they look at, for example, question-wise data. So normally sometimes when we do a test, we get a score at the end of the test, but that score itself is not so insightful or useful. But then if you look at individual questions that represent individual skills or competency, and it's important in this that the questions be designed in such a way that they are actually measuring those skills and children are answering it. Only children who have mastered those skills are able to answer that question correctly, as opposed to something that they might have learned in the textbook and it is in a textbookish form, and then they are able to answer it. So if these two conditions are met, one, that the questions are well designed to measure the competencies, and two, information is available to the teacher at the level of a question. So if you can imagine a grid, I have the details of all the children on the rows, and then I have the details of the questions on the columns. And I'm able to now look at, it could be a matter of whether a child got it right or wrong, it could be a short answer, it could be but all of this is visible in that grid. And this simple format is very effective to find out how well children are learning and what they have learned. One of the things that we do in this process is that you can actually calculate percentages of which are the questions that a lot of children have struggled in, and similarly which are the questions that most children have got correct. In that way you can also identify the easier and the more difficult questions. So you have to calculate the averages. In case there is a benchmark group, for example, if it's a group school, then I may have the scores for that group. In national tests like ASSET, we have a national benchmarking score. This is also extremely useful. Even if I have section A, B, C, and D, for example, I can compare the score of my section A in a particular question with that of the entire group. So just this simple grid, which has the questions and the students, can give a lot of insights about the learning gaps. And this is a starting point. In more sophisticated analysis, we use more sophisticated statistical tools and response theory. But this is the kind of thing that any teacher can do as long as they have a good assessment paper and scores question-wise.
So, thank you. So that means the focus of the assessment should be a good question.
Absolutely. If in case the question is such that it's a very typical question, the kind of question that is there in the textbook, the kind of question that is kind of discussed most often in the class, you will find that the answers you get from children are mechanical. If you ask children what is the area of a rectangle, they know that they have to multiply the length and the breadth. Sometimes you will actually show the length and the breadth and they will multiply it and give the answer. Similarly, if you ask for definitions in science or you ask for formulas in science, you will get standard responses which are the expected response but which are not really capturing understanding. So yes, questions have to be of a form where the understanding is checked, and the meaning of that is that we know that children struggle with certain concepts, and we know that in a class of 30 or 40 there will be a number of children who will struggle with certain concepts. Every question must be designed to actually at some level distinguish, either I have to distinguish between the top 10% and the others, or the top 50% and the others, or it could be an easier question but still it should be such that some of the weakest children would get it incorrect. So that's called discrimination, where a question has to have the ability to tell whether some children have developed the skill or not. So that is very important, and that is one of the characteristics of a good question.
My next question is how would the school handhold teachers to interpret and analyze this data effectively?
So even with an Excel file, this could be started off. If in case you have the data is coming from a system and you have it on a system, that's great. But at the very simplest level, even if children are taking an assessment on, say, a Google form, Google form will give you the results in a spreadsheet format. Once you have the results in a spreadsheet format and the children have gone through the questions, the first exercise that I would recommend teachers do is put it in this particular format where you have the children and you have the scores, and then all that is the marks are arranged. Now at this point there can be random checks, so one can check, the teacher himself or herself can check that if student Samir Gupta had answered C to question number 7, then that is entered correctly. So the first step is to kind of have this data entered. A school can handhold teachers by providing this data, because this is not something that the teacher has to do, though like I said, systems like Google Forms do provide the data almost in this form. The second step is to actually look for a few common questions. For example, which were the 3 questions that were the most difficult in my grade? So what we do is add 4 or 5 questions like this. Which were the 3 most difficult questions? Which were the 3 easiest questions? If you have the scores of all the sections, you can also compare the two. You can say, in which question did my class perform the best compared to the overall all the sections. So it's not the best performance, which could be different, but the best performance compared to all the sections. So helping the teachers go through these steps, and as they may face some difficulty, and you can help them with that. But as they cover these 3 or 4 steps, they understand the process and get much stronger at it. One of the other things that it's very easy to see in an approach like this is where there are patterns of wrong answers. So if I pick up any question and then move down that column, or pick up a student and move across that row, that's another exercise. Another exercise is to sort. So we normally sort the rows, and you put the highest value and the lowest value. But you can also sort the columns in order to get the easiest question and the most difficult question. So some of these are basic data handling techniques, and just even if I take a dummy sheet in Excel or Google Sheets, and I with this kind of data of students and scores and questions, with the question paper available separately, doing these 3 or 4 exercises and questions actually makes teachers quite comfortable with analyzing this level of insights and misconceptions using data like this.
We have seen, sir, during ASSET, we have seen a single question where the highest performer of the class also does not do good, as well as a weaker student also does not do good. So it means it's a class level misconception or that age level misconception.
Correct. So it's very important to identify. So there are certain questions where there are patterns like this. There are always individual patterns. For example, I may make a careless mistake. I may guess and get it right. So there are these kind of individual patterns. But what is much more interesting in a class is the group patterns. So like I said, we say that questions can get, each question discriminates at a different level. That means there are certain questions that are difficult for most of the children. There are other questions that is difficult for children who are scoring below a certain percentage. So yes, these patterns are observed, and it kind of clearly shows teachers what they need to focus on, which are the questions that are difficult for the brighter students. We also talk about questions anchoring at different levels of student performance, which is a slightly advanced concept, and you can do it with a larger group of students. But all of these give teachers a lot of insights actually about what children have learned. Remember, it's not a statistical exercise, it is an educational exercise. And one of the important things is to have the actual questions available. For example, if this is a Google sheet, another sheet could have the questions in the correct order. So when I find that children are struggling with question number 10, or everybody has answered option C for question number 12, a teacher would like to and definitely must quickly go to that sheet and see, okay, what was question 12? Or if she has that on paper with her, open that paper and see what was question number 12, what was option C of this question. So it's not a statistical exercise, it's an educational exercise to get pedagogical insights about learning.
So how can schools or can action research be used in education to help improve learning outcomes of students and teachers? Both?
Yes. If in case an assessment is conducted and teachers actually get children to write answers like this and then they record this, this is a good example of a simple action research where I do this and then I try to answer certain questions. And so that is exactly a good way to kind of start, because now I can look at 3 different sections, and assuming there are 2 or 3 different teachers teaching those sections, one of the action research questions I would ask is that, is there a question that children in one section have done well, but others have done poorly? And invariably there will be. So that's one example. But there are many such points like this that teachers can do these little experiments in class. What happens in an assessment if I change question number 6 in this way? I change an option or I change the figure. So that's a very good research, because you can see what were the options children selected, what are the pattern of responses in the original question, and what happened when they changed it a bit. So like this, there are many different ideas where one can conduct small action research experiments and get a lot of insights about what children are learning, where they are struggling, and especially at a time like this, how the fact that we've not had regular schooling for so many months has affected their learning and understanding. So yes, action research is the key part of doing this successfully.
Especially for this year, sir, we could also do a year-on-year analysis and see that this question, how students answered last year vis-a-vis this year.
Absolutely. So if such data is available of past years, that's a very powerful analysis, because that's the question everybody is asking, that has there been a learning loss? What is the extent of learning loss? So we always find that there are key concepts across the subjects, and we know from data like ASSET, detailed assessment, and MindSpark that if I have a question that is asking for a core concept in science or a core concept in mathematics, we know that grade 7 children answer at a certain percentage. So wherever we find that number is changing this year, we can estimate that this is an impact of COVID. So yes, data like that can be used to identify these learning gaps.
Thank you, sir. So today, a short discussion on this. Again, I'll come back to you with more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.